Hello, my friends. I am Asha Nayaswami, my friend Keshava. We are going to continue with our delightful study of Swami's book, In Divine Friendship, but we're going to start with some chanting and a few minutes of meditation.
Would you like to pray first?
Oh, yes, let's pray first. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, back on with the microphone. Just a minute. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to feel your presence. Open our hearts that we might receive you completely. Show us that all the fulfillment that we're longing for, that we're seeking here, there, and everywhere, is already living within us, in our attunement with you. Help us in everything we do to act first from an awareness of your inner guidance, and then to follow your will as we live in this world. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen. Now we'll have a little chanting.
I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. Still I see the path through thy mercy. I have made thee pole star of my life. I have made thee pole star of my life. Though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, though my sea is dark and my stars are gone, still I see the path through thy mercy. and lame, those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? Those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? They have no one, Lord, they have no one. Do not turn them away. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Do not turn them away. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. Those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. Those who are in despair, wipe thou their tears. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door, and give them an audience, Lord. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. Those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? Those who are drowned in sin, to whom will they go? They have no one, Lord, they have no one. Do not turn them away. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. They have heard thy name, the blind, halt and lame. They have come to thy door, Lord. They have come to thy door. Give them an audience, Lord. Give them an audience, Lord. Give them an audience, Lord.
Om, peace. Amen. So, my friends, we are in the middle of this book, and we're in a very interesting section called Yoga Techniques. This moves a little faster than some things because they're much more straightforward, what he's saying here, for the most part. So let's see what happens. I got partway through a letter last time we were together. It was from December 12th, 1982. And the little summary says, we can lose spiritual powers very easily. I'm going to read the first two paragraphs just to keep us straight. First, let me tell you that I'm praying deeply for you that you see this situation clearly. And then he tells what the subject is. When one receives visions and voices such as you have experienced, it becomes very difficult to distinguish how real they are. I cannot tell just how real your own experiences have been, but I do have certain doubts concerning them. My strong advice to you is that you not give them too much attention. So he starts, first, let me tell you, I'm praying deeply that you'll see this situation in the right way. I know I talked about this last time. This is always very tricky because when somebody comes to you with a subjective experience and they insist to you that it's superconscious, and you may not be so sure, but of course you're not inside their reality. So I'm praying that you see this clearly. So then Swami now goes on. I read those 2 paragraphs last week. There are many subtle forces seeking to influence people. Some of those forces are evil. Some of them may be disembodied souls who are just confused, selfish, or petty. And sometimes a part of your own mind tries to fool us by telling us what our ego would like to hear. Voices and visions do come on the spiritual path, but we shouldn't think of them as goals in themselves, nor should we pursue them too seriously. In any case, try to be absolutely sure of their divine origin. So let's just sort of talk about, there are many forces out there, people. The idea that there are spirits around us who are trying to talk to us, the idea, what this is going toward is the idea of possession, that there are other beings who want to get into our minds. The simple truth is, it's the simple truth. There are forces that are trying to influence. Swami says some of those forces are evil. Some of them is actually the darkening satanic force or active, really powerful negative forces. Just as there are angels, there are also devils. Not that we should be really paranoid about it, but we should know that it's a fact. Swami himself, being a very bold type of person, when he first heard about demonic entities or the power of evil that could possess someone, Swami writes about it in The Path, and I heard him talking about it in a recording of a talk. He was saying when he heard about it, he just thought, I want to know what this is about. I want to understand this. So he said not long afterwards, he was asleep, and he was having a dream. And in the dream, it was like, oh, it's time for me to find out about disembodied evil spirits. And in the dream then, he went off into some room, sort of a barren room. And Swami was accustomed by that point to practicing one of the meditation techniques, which is called the Om technique, in which you learn to attune to the ever uplifting, beautiful sound of the cosmos, the great Amen, the Om sound, they call it in India, and it's a hum, it's a sound like that. It's a very lovely sound. But he said he heard a variation of the Om in that room, but it was darkening. Instead of being sort of unifying and uplifting, it was downward pulling. It was it was just the opposite side of the vibration of the universe. And he said, and then he became aware of this presence, and then he began to feel that presence moving into him. And he said at that point, all of a sudden, he wasn't sure that he could stand strong against that force coming into him. And in the dream, he decided he'd had enough. And he just called out, Master, like that. And as soon as he called for his guru, all the dark forces disappeared. That even just calling Master's name was sufficient to turn that dark force away. And then Swami woke up. And he felt it was a true experience of that kind of dark force. Those things exist. So that's one reality. Most of us are not going to be, unless we've gone out and cultivated and tried to find those dark forces, mostly we won't be troubled on that level. But there are other disembodied spirits whom Swami describes as either confused, selfish, or petty, who are caught between the worlds or who are so full of worldly desires that they just can't separate and go into the astral world, and they literally look around for bodies that they can get into. Master said they frequent the places where people get drunk. And when people get drunk, they lose control over their own minds. And sometimes you hear about people who do things when they're drunk, even commit violent crimes. And they have no idea why they did it. And in some of those cases, at least, when they're really influenced by drugs or really influenced by alcohol, that some other entity, some disembodied being came into the body and then acted through it because it had a lust for whatever that might be, a lust for inebriation, for drug experience, or for violence. It's not something we all have to sit around and worry about, but it's a fact. And it's one of the reasons why we need to stay very conscious and very present in our own bodies. People think they'll just drink until they pass out, and what difference does it make? It can make a huge difference. Many things can happen. We're not meant to relinquish control over our own physical bodies. So Swami is saying, this person apparently is saying, I'm hearing voices, I'm having visions. Swami says, first, I pray that you'll understand this correctly. Yes, these things can happen, but other forces can masquerade. So there's outright evil, there's disembodied spirits. I'm going to just tell you this story about, there was this, in the early years of Ananda, we were naive a lot of times in what we thought we could do. And this woman came to the community. She was a very good woman. She'd had a very hard upbringing and had been on psychiatric medications for many years by the time we met her. She was also had inherited a great deal of money from her parents. So it was an odd situation in countless different ways. She was very generous. The astrological bangle, the gold, silver, and copper bangle that I wear, was a gift from her. She bought like 30 of them and gave them out to a lot of the founding members of Ananda who couldn't afford to buy them. They cost a crashing $150 at that point, but it was more money than we had. And so she bought them for all of us. She bought Swami's jeweled bangle. And he helped her a great deal. And we had the thought that somehow we could cure her. And, we thought we could just take her off her psychiatric meds and cure her, which was exceedingly naive. But our friendship to her was a great help to her in her life. And her generosity to Swami earned her a great deal of good karma. She's not living anymore, and I'm sure her next incarnation will be better for all that she did. I thank her. But in the course of things, we began to have the feeling that she was inhabited by spirits, by disembodied spirits. It was consistent with other things about her. And this Ayurvedic doctor came, this Indian doctor, and it was his intuitive analysis that she was, in fact, that there were disembodied spirits that were with her. And sometimes when she was asleep, those spirits would roam around the area where we all lived. This is when I was in the monastery. There were about 10 or 12 girls. And I mean, all of this, you may think all of this is fantasy, but this is really what I think happened. And those spirits would just sort of try to find somebody else to entertain them while this gal was asleep. And they came into my trailer one night. I just felt them. I just woke up and I wasn't alone in there. They weren't evil, but they weren't very nice either. And they frightened me. I have to say that. It scared me when they came in, and I turned on all the lights and began to chant and turned on all the lights. I lit the gas, what did we call them then? They have a name for it, but special kind of, it'll come out. I'll pop it out a few minutes from now because I'll remember what it's called. Special kind of Aladdin lamps. They were Aladdin? That doesn't seem like a very sensible thing. Maybe that is what they were called, but they had the special wicks and all that. That's what we all had. But I felt them come in, and they made me exceedingly nervous. We ended up putting herbs over our doorways and things like that. So that was my experience. But this is the relevant part of this is they came into Seva's apartment. Now, Seva was our mother superior. She was our elder sister, and she was in charge of the convent, and she was and is a magnificent soul with a tremendous amount of courage. They came to see her. Her response, she treated them just like she treated us, which was these were naughty children. And she scolded them. She scolded them for bothering our other friend. What are you doing in that? That's not where you belong. You people should be going on to the astral world. Why are you messing around down here? And how dare you disturb my girls in the middle of the night? And it never crossed her mind to be afraid of them. They were just petty, selfish, confused souls. It wasn't evil. They were just bad little boys and girls, whoever they were or ever had been. But I thought, that's exactly right. They're disembodied, but they're just human. They're just human souls without bodies who really are mixed up about what they ought to be doing. But it was a good lesson for me. They were strange, and so they frightened me. And because I was afraid, they found an entry. Because that's how, well, either you let down your guard completely, and our friend, because she was under psychiatric meds and things, she wasn't really in control of her own mind. And you don't know which went first, the chicken or the egg in that one. But Seva just wasn't going to have any nonsense from them. But I was nervous, and that nervousness, they feed off that nervousness. So it's very important. It's very important when you think about these things. There's no reason to be afraid. This is also why, at least one should be extremely careful about channeled information, because you're getting information from someone whose claim to fame is that they're dead, which is not really a claim to fame, because all of us will be dead at some point or another. And being dead does not automatically make you wise. It just makes you dead, that's all. And if they're genuinely wise, well, there's lots of things that could be said about it. But you can't see it. You can't look at the person. You can look at the channel, but you can't look at the source. There's ways, one's intuition, one's common sense, but you can't tell what kind of character this person has. You can't look into their eyes and see whether they have love or not. You can't observe their behavior and see if they're consistent in what they say. So you have to be very, very careful about these things. Merely because it's outside the normal rational process does not mean that it's beyond the capacity of reason to consider. So here Swami's saying, you're hearing voices, you're having visions, but there are many places these can come from. Outright evil, confused, disembodied souls who are just playing with you, because being outside of bodies, they can make things happen, conceivably, just because they're on another plane. And then the last thing is quite simply, and sometimes a part of your own mind tries to fool us by telling us what our ego would like to hear. So we also have to be careful, and often voices and often disembodied spirits will flatter us. Oh, you're really such a great soul. You're really a healer. The people here don't know, but you have all these powers. You need to be very, very careful. If you have some paranormal experience and the information and the advice you receive suddenly makes you out of the ordinary special, because true spiritual inspiration makes us feel exceedingly humble. So if any part of the experience, and you can feel it in yourself, is making you suddenly proud, special, unappreciated, I'll show them, I really have this great future, be exceedingly suspicious of that, exceedingly suspicious. Because the masters never flatter. The masters support us, they encourage us, but they never flatter. I watched that with Swamiji. He just never did. He was very appreciative. He would commend you when you did good work, and he would commend you in exactly. He would commend you in a way that made you feel very encouraged, partly because it was always true. It was never exaggerated. He would just say exactly what was true. You would feel the truth of it, and there would just be this really calm confirmation within yourself. And if it was outstanding, Swami would say it was outstanding, but he would never flatter. Flatter is when you just exaggerate so that a person will feel really special. Swami wanted us to feel special in the eyes of God, not special in the eyes of our own ego. And that was a big, big difference. So he says, be very careful. Voices and visions do come, but don't think of them as goals, meaning just because you have them, it doesn't mean you really have any spiritual advancement. And it's not a sign of anything except itself. Don't pursue them seriously. And in any case, try to be absolutely sure of their divine origin. These are incredibly important points. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, one of the most ancient statements about yoga, I've said this already recently, but it bears saying again, he has all these lists in various places of possible pitfalls on the path, and one of them is false visions. So you don't have to feel like there's something wrong with you if you're sort of getting swept up into this. It's one of the things that happens, and it's often the subconscious mind. You can have odd experiences, but they don't necessarily come from the superconscious. They're just, think of the dreams that we have. Think how wild our sleep dreams can be. Just, you don't know where you are. You don't know what you're doing in your sleep dreams. Well, that's just the subconscious mind acting. It's perfectly capable of acting when you're not physically asleep, and just presenting images to you that are, well, as he said, you're making them up from your own mind. They're not a descent of spirit into you. They're just your own mind spinning. Just like, yes, you have to just be very careful, because false visions are a classic stage on the spiritual path. And if your ego gets all involved in them, not only are you misled by the visions themselves, but then you get a completely confused idea of your own spirituality, your own future, your own potential, and then you have to extricate yourself from the wrong information, and you have to extricate yourself from the damage that's been done to your ego freedom. So in any case, be absolutely sure of their divine origin. Swami says, it is a lot more helpful simply to develop our devotion and love for God and our attunement with Him and with those who serve Him sincerely. I think Swami puts that in there, attunement with God and with those who serve Him sincerely. Now I'm going to read between the lines here. It's quite possible that whoever this is has been trying to get confirmation for their visions and their voices, and it's quite likely that other spiritual leaders at Ananda have not been supportive. So Swami just puts in here, and that's one of the ways that you can help find out whether your visions are of a divine origin, is that you should ask advice from people you have reason to trust. And I often suggest, if at all possible in your life, try to cultivate some relationships, or at least one, with some person whose spiritual depth you respect and whose impersonal willingness to tell you the truth you can rely upon. And it's better to develop those relationships before you absolutely need them, so that when you find yourself caught up in something like this, you can go to someone and say, what do you think? This is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm hearing. What do you think? And God can speak. See, this is one of the things I think is very funny. We know that God can speak about me to me, but we assume that God can never speak about me to anybody but me. I mean, you can get really good advice from other people. God can speak to other people about you, and sometimes more clearly, because we ourselves, we have so many conflicting cross currents of ego within us. It's very hard to be that clear about yourself. So Swami says here, it's a lot more helpful to develop our devotion and love for God, meaning rather than cultivating visions, and our attunement with God and with those who serve Him sincerely, in a whole other series of talks that I've been giving at the same period of time. Swami has a whole story about to try to be in tune with those who are more advanced than you on the spiritual path is a tremendous help. To have deep and true spiritual examples and spiritual friends. So this person is getting a little off, seemingly, and Swami's trying to encourage them also to relate more to their Guru Bhais, to their other friendly devotees. When we seek devotion and humility, we are not tempted by the powers and spiritual attainments that are more fascinating to the ego than to the soul. So again, he's putting this in here. The ego gets really excited about these things that are happening. We want confirmation of our spiritual life, and we want our lives to be interesting. I mean, the problem with life is that it's anguishing monotony. Problem even with the spiritual path is that it just goes on day after day after day. And we don't just find ourselves in samadhi. When I was first learning about the spiritual path in 1966, and we were a little coterie of people, men and women, who were really enjoying learning about the spiritual path. And somewhere in there, someone read that there were 3 ways that enlightenment comes. Let me think, what would be the 3 ways? Well, it can come when you're in deep meditation. It can come when you're just having your ordinary life. And it can come while you're asleep. So my friend decided that he was going to just sleep as much as he could and go for enlightenment coming into sleep. Of course, he was just joking. But we always loved that. I always have loved it. It was a true statement. I mean, sometimes it just does happen that your karma is there. But it doesn't happen because you cultivate the ability to sleep. It's just, and I don't even remember where that came from. I only remember our laughing about it. And every time you go to sleep, you hope that, well, this is the night, that it happens to me. Swami says, we can lose our spiritual powers very easily if they mislead us into spiritual pride. Swami hints at this person, whoever this is, about pride more than once in this letter. We can lose our spiritual powers very easily if they mislead us into spiritual pride. Now, he's not just talking about visions. If in any way what you're doing spiritually begins to make you self-conscious and think that you're really hot stuff because God has really singled you out, you're just on your way to a fall. That's what happens. Humility is the safest path. It's always just God through us. It's never us. Whenever you feel the ego beginning to swell up, you have to take that as a life-threatening emergency. Whenever anything that's happening to you spiritually, you feel it clinging to you, that's a very serious problem. You have to take that very seriously and practice devotion, and pray to God to be freed from that ego identity, because it'll really lead you astray. I remember we were doing a project. I know I've said this before, but it was a funny moment. We were doing a project, and it was sequential, and different ones of us had sort of responsibility at different times. And when I got responsibility, I wanted to succeed. And I just made some decisions that guaranteed a total flop in what I did. And afterwards, when it was clear that my efforts had flopped, Swami just smiled at me so sweetly, and he said, Asha, whenever your ego gets involved, you make terrible decisions. And I hadn't realized it, but as soon as he said it, I realized that my motivation had been impure. I wanted to succeed, and I wanted to succeed and show everyone that I could succeed. I wasn't thinking about serving. I wasn't thinking about what people needed. I wasn't thinking about all the things I should have been. I'd just been thinking about myself. And whenever your ego gets involved, you make terrible decisions. I've watched it happen again, unfortunately, more than once since that moment. But I know what it is. Oh yeah, my ego got involved, and I made a terrible decision. So we always have to be very vigilant on that point. You get so that you can feel it. It's not always so easy to extricate yourself, but at least you can be cautious. A much more lasting and useful spiritual goal is to develop love and devotion for God and the ability to manifest love every day in our lives. This is the way of the masters. So here he's just also correcting the complete misunderstanding. Voices and visions don't mean anything. It's the ability to manifest love every day in our lives. That's the way of the masters. So, now this one was also in 1982, and he says yoga is a much safer path. So this is a conversation about someone questioning the benefit of yoga. I'm not sure. I think this person must have had some sort of a Christian orientation or just been influenced by traditional religious ideas that might have spoken against yoga. I don't know anything about the person in this letter. So Swami says, "Dear so-and-so, yes, the danger from yoga practice is, as you say, namely that it can make one self-centered if he thinks only of developing himself." Now, we're not just talking yoga postures. We're talking about the practice of yoga, which is meditation and the effort to unite our consciousness with the divine. So he says, yes, practicing yoga, meditation, making a conscious and deliberate spiritual effort can make you self-centered if all you're thinking about is how I can advance spiritually. And that's how people do get involved. This is going to help me advance spiritually, so now I'm going to do everything to advance spiritually. And the focus is not on humility and love and devotion to God, is how I can make myself advance. And yeah, you can become quite self-centered in that. It can also be harmful if one practices violent breathing exercises, which can awaken energies before the body is ready to receive them. This was 1982. There was an awful lot going on in the yoga scene at that point, and people were not very knowledgeable. So there were practices that were just that, just violent. You just sort of develop all this power by your will using the breath. It can be done, but it's not very good for you. There is another aspect to yoga, however, that makes it a much safer path than the better-known path of mystical love and prayer. So I think this was the context. Why do I need to practice yoga? My church tells me if I just love God and pray, that's where real salvation comes from. So he says this is why yoga is better than that path. In the West, many saints have suffered in their bodies from the inflow of divine grace. No, they weren't destroyed by grace, and their suffering gradually became transmuted into perfect attunement with the divine flow. They might have been spared much physical suffering, however. Now he's thinking about many classic stories about great Catholic saints. St. Teresa of Avila, St. Francis are two examples that come to mind. St. John of the Cross, and many of them, many saints, their bodies react. What happens is they have tremendous love and devotion and tremendous willpower going toward loving God, and that grace begins to come into them. But this is how it's described. The physical body is absorbing more energy than it is prepared to integrate. And as a result, Teresa of Avila had continuous nausea. She was blind for a period of time. She was paralyzed for a while. These stories are not unusual. That just even as the spirit is growing within them, the physical body is having a very dramatic time, so much so that in the spiritual tradition of the West, they assume that that's essential. They assume that it's essential that you go through these very hard physical experiences as you're growing in grace. But Swami says they might have been spared much physical suffering. What happened to them, especially as grace first began to operate in their bodies, was like turning water on at the faucet before straightening out the hose. That's a picture that all of us can understand. A strong flow of water can straighten out the hose, true, but how much better if we take the time to straighten it ourselves. The lashing back and forth which ensues as the water straightens the hose can create a degree of havoc. It seems like an odd situation that he's describing, but it's completely true. Master talked about it. The actual practice of yoga is that it gradually clears the obstructions in the chakras. It actually strengthens and makes more dynamic the actual physical self, so that when grace is just a massive increase of energy. Grace is a massive increase of energy, so that when the faucet, the water from the faucet is turned on, much of the hose has already been straightened out. So he says here, so it is that the practice of yoga involves not only awakening energies, but also, even more specifically, opening up the channel of the spine so that the flow of grace can enter the body unimpeded. Not knowing what was happening, Western mystics and saints have often suffered physically, at least until finally the purification process ended. We don't find that sort of thing happening nearly so much among yogis. Even, yogis who are at the same state of consciousness, going through the same experiences, because they're meditating in a scientific way in relation to the chakras and the spine, the energy flows with much less obstacles, with many fewer obstacles. That was just how Master stated it. The Christian saints advanced gloriously and became purified, but they could have advanced with much less physical chaos if they had also had the practice of yoga. Of course, it wasn't divine will that they would, but this is how he's trying to explain it. So it is true, oh no, I went through that. In fact, then, yoga is very much the safer path. It is important, however, not to do the more violent exercises one finds available in books and from certain organizations, so he does warn against that. The way Master teaches us and the way Kriya Yoga teaches us to increase the energy is you increase devotion and magnetism at the spiritual eye. And what that does is, as the magnetism at the spiritual eye increases, then the vrittis throughout the spine, the vrittis are like whirlpools in a river, and when the magnetism at the spiritual eye increases, the flow of the river increases, and all the little whirlpools that have less magnetism to spin than the river has to flow, those vrittis just get drawn in. And so what happens is the flow of the river, so to speak, of energy up the spine, just increases and increases, and the vrittis, which are obstacles to that flow, gradually get absorbed into the river, so that the increase of the flow of energy is in direct proportion to our ability to concentrate and offer ourselves at the spiritual eye. So the whole thing works in a very harmonious, balanced flow. Now, what Swami's warning against, certain violent breathing exercises or other kinds of exercises, actually try to drive the energy up from the base of the spine. Try to awaken the Kundalini by intense, fierce, willpower-driven force against it at the base of the spine. But if you increase it from the base, then it has to go through the channel where the vrittis are still spinning, where the channel itself has not been purified, where the devotional self-offering to the divine has not been developed. And so awakening the energy that way can have a very deleterious effect on the physical body, on the mind, and also on the egoic self. It's just not wholesome. So devotion and humility. But with Kriya Yoga, with the practice that Yogananda teaches, these things rarely happen because you're magnetizing the energy from the point of view of attunement rather than driving it up with egoic will. Big difference, very important. Would God allow a person to be destroyed by these energies? This is probably a question that she asked. That yoga can actually destroy you if you do it incorrectly. Would God allow a person to be destroyed by these energies? I cannot imagine him doing so, and know of no case to justify such a doubt, that God is against yoga. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, "O Arjuna, know this for certainty, my devotee is never lost." So, in Divine Friendship, Swamiji. Well, Swami, he never signed his name Swamiji. J.I. is a term of endearment and respect, so it doesn't make any sense to use it on yourself. Oh, my dear, oh, how wonderful, my dear, sweet, wonderful me. So he would always sign it just Swami or Kriyananda, depending. This question is about Savasana or the corpse pose. May 13th, these are all very specific questions. May 13th, 2001. I think Swami's talking to one of our own teachers who asked a question about Savasana. I assume you teach Savasana with the hands turned upward, as I always did. Savasana is the corpse pose, where you just lie out on your back like a corpse. And it's a total relaxation that in Ananda Hatha Yoga, at least, it's taught at the end of your session. And you take all that energy and you use it to become very still, very, very relaxed, but not falling asleep, just dynamically awake, but with all the tension gone. So he says, I assume you teach it with the hands turned upward. So if you have your hands stretched by your sides, you can either put your palms on the ground or you can put your palms upward. My explanation for doing so was that position induces in the mind a more receptive attitude than when the hands are turned down. Recently, however, I've come upon another reason for keeping them turned upward. This one is purely mechanical. When the hands are turned upward, the lungs receive more air. Try it, and you'll see that it's true. This may also be why Master had us turn the hands upward at the junction of the thighs and the abdomen during meditation. Just a comment. Sometimes people, when they would sit to meditate, would put their hands palms downward. And Swamp Master always taught to turn with the palms upward. Many teachers teach with the palms upward. I mean, obviously it's much more receptive when you reach out for anything. Whenever you're imploring someone and wanting, you always put your palms upward. If you reach out with your hands, with your palms downward, if you just try it, you reach out towards someone with your palms downward, it's a very strange sort of thing, but we often reach out towards someone with our hands upward. So when we're meditating, we're trying to call the grace of the divine in. When we're doing Savasana, we're trying to relax into the divine energy. So the palms are turned upward. And Swami says, apparently, you get more air in your lungs when your palms are turned upward. And he's not just talking about Savasana. So I don't know. I've never tested it. It's an interesting theory. Try it. He says you'll find out it's true. Okay, next letter. Also in 1982, Swami was a very prolific correspondent in 1982. This is about drawing God's blessings in meditation. Meditation in the purest sense is not thinking of anything. It is a state of consciousness. Now, that's just a very interesting statement, isn't it? It's not thinking, it's a state of meditation is a state of consciousness. It's not a particular thought form. This is part of the difference between just mindfulness, which is just being aware of your thoughts and watching them and so on like that. When you really get deep in meditation, you shift into another reality. So it isn't just this one with nicer images. It's a whole vibratory change. It is a state of consciousness. Instead of thinking, therefore, we concentrate on a simple practice like the Hong Sau technique, which is observing the breath and repeating a mantra as we do so. In this way, our minds become calmer. After practicing a technique for a while, just enjoy the fruits of your efforts for at least a quarter of an hour, the longer the better. Trying not to let stray thoughts intrude. This state itself is meditation. Just sitting in a state of complete calmness after you've brought yourself to a focus by the practice of a technique. You feel it, you sort of feel that you can be somewhere without thinking. But thoughts will try to intrude. So that's what happens. Sometimes when you sit to meditate, this state may not come. With some people, it may seldom come. I think that's a very important thing for everyone to realize. I'm going to say it again. Sometimes when you sit to meditate, this state may not come. For some people, it seldom comes. So it's just the way it is. We don't know what the mystery of it is. So you can't just always be evaluating yourself. I'm succeeding at my meditation, I'm failing. You just don't know. These results of meditation are not nearly so important as your effort to grow closer to God. So it's the sincerity of our heart. Swami just said in a simple context, God reads the heart. It isn't what we think, it isn't what we say, it's none of that. It's who we truly are in the deepest part of ourselves. And if we're deeply sincere, even if we're totally inept, you don't know why you're good or bad at something. It's very hard to tell. Karma plays a role in it. Past lives, who knows? Bad habits we've picked up. But God reads the heart. And that means you will never be misunderstood if you're deeply sincere. And that's the most important thing to cultivate, is just deep sincerity. I may be very bad at this, Lord, but I love you. That's why he says, the results of meditation are not nearly so important as your efforts to grow closer to God. To an extent, your efforts will determine the result. God's grace, however, is a factor also. If you do your part in showing him your devotion in sincerity, he will do his by blessing you in some way. I when I was first beginning to meditate, well, mostly through my life, sometimes I meditate well and sometimes I don't meditate well. But my life has been totally changed by the fact that I meditate. And even from the very beginning, when nothing much was ever happening, I've never been a spectacular meditator. And I mean, I have my moments, but it's never been like, just day after day of spectacular meditation ever. But my whole life is different because I meditate, and my life would not be a fraction as blessed as it is if I didn't meditate. But it's not because of what happens in meditation. It's because by meditating, I show God my devotion and my sincerity, and I make the best effort I can. And that's what really counts. God reads the heart. So some people have deep experiences easily. Sometimes have them occasionally. Some people seldom have them. But a simple other way to think about it is think how much worse it would be if we didn't even try. Because the mind then would just roll like a rock downhill and it would never stop. That was sort of how I always thought about it, especially at the beginning when it was what it was. It was like, a swing just going out of control, and at least, a couple of times a day I would pull it to a stop. So it could never really get away from me. Even if it tried to, I could at least pull it back, at least make an effort to pull it back. The other image that is often used is if you're riding a horse and the horse gets the bit between its teeth and runs away with you. When you first start pulling on the reins, it's not enough to stop it. But eventually it will stop if you keep working with it. And that's sort of what it is with the mind. We can't help the karma. We can't help what we've done in the past to bring us to this particular karmic state. All we can do is put out the right effort so that what comes next will be more reflective of where we want to be. So one can't always control one's ability or lack of ability to meditate, but one can consistently persevere, and in that transformation will come. It's guaranteed. My devotee is never lost. Okay. Rather than trying to visualize, so I think that this person must have asked, I'm going to visualize this happening or visualize that happening. So Swami says, rather than trying to visualize, you might want to just feel Master's presence and offer your devotion to him while doing the techniques. When you focus your awareness on a technique, and when you feel God's presence in meditation, this is a different experience from thinking about something. I think Swami's afraid if this person goes to this visualization that they'll just never shift out of the thinking mode. It'll just keep them in that ideas, and they'll never quiet enough to really just feel what's there. Mundane thoughts do come up during meditation. Instead of being too concerned about them, be aware that the thought is there, bless it, and offer it up to Master. One of the things about the spiritual path in general, meditation in specific, it's bad enough that you're restless in meditation. You don't want to add to it by being upset because you're restless in meditation. It's just you're restless in meditation. Someday you won't be. Maybe tomorrow you won't be. Maybe the day after you will be. But if one develops a complex about it, then this anxiety begins to set in, and this intensity of effort, and then this disappointment when it fails, and then this discouragement. All of it's completely unnecessary. All you are is a little restless in meditation, and eventually it'll go away. Swami once said to me in relatively short order. Oh, relative to what, sir? Eternity? I mean, or my lifespan, or what? But He says, if, mundane thoughts do come up, just don't be too concerned about them. Just notice them, offer them up to Master. Every person's experience of meditation is different. You felt insecure about your efforts, but I don't think you're doing badly. Just relax and enjoy the experience. Now see, here's a very typical example of Swami. He doesn't actually say this person is doing well. You've been very, let's see, you felt insecure about your efforts. But Swami doesn't say, I think you're doing very well. He says, I don't think you're doing badly. And the person must have said, I think I'm doing badly. And Swami said, no, I don't think you're doing badly. But I'm just pointing out that he could have laid it on with a trowel about what this person was doing, but it wouldn't have been honest. So they said, I feel like I'm doing badly. He said, I don't think you're doing badly. But he didn't go any farther with it. It just, not that he was trying to put the person down, but I'm pointing out that in my experience of Swamiji, he always told the truth. And I say that because there was so much power in the fact that he always told the truth. I mean, not only power in the sense that he had spiritual power and spiritual magnetism, but there was so much power in his relationships with other people because he was always truthful. And that's what we want in ourselves. We want people to really trust us and to look to you as someone who will tell them the truth, that I can ask you an honest question and I will get an honest answer. And if we've just been throwing words around all the time, we don't have that magnetism. People won't believe us. Even when we do tell the truth, they won't believe us. So be very thoughtful about what you say. I find it a great deal of fun also to always be positive about someone and truthful at the same time. Because there's always a way you can say it. And then if there is, no examples come to my mind, but if I think of some, I'll offer them to you. Or you just say something good about the person. Even if we all know what we're talking about, truthful. So that way, you were concerned, you've been insecure about your efforts. I don't think you're doing badly. But that was it. And then also, if you're listening to Swami, you can hear exactly what he tells you. And then you can think about it. What can I do? What does this mean? Where should I go with this? Just relax and enjoy the experience. Okay, number 3. Next letter. Now we're up, not that these are sequential, but we're out of 1982, 2003. It's a very simple question about the energization exercises. You've written about the energization exercises in developing the willpower. Yes, of course, the energization exercises help to develop the willpower. Master defined the will as desire plus energy directed toward fulfillment. Willpower is desire plus energy directed toward fulfillment. That's a very nice thing in itself, isn't it? A lot of people have lots of desire, but they don't direct energy to fulfill it. So it just doesn't happen. So willpower is when you see something that you want to accomplish and you put the energy behind it. An awareness of energy, which the exercises help to develop, is an important aspect of using willpower. So what he's saying, that because the energization exercises have you use the physical body to train the will to send energy at will. You use your physical body, all different parts of your body, and you tense the muscles to sort of signal the arrival of that willpower, and then you also relax afterwards and relax the tension and feel the energy flowing. And you just become aware of the fact that you can send energy at will all around your body, and you get to know what it feels like to have energy in your body. You can feel where the energy is weak and you can strengthen it with your willpower. So to be aware of energy, since willpower is energy directed toward fulfillment, if we're more aware of the energy, then we can direct that energy. So it all works together. Where does energy come from? How do I find it? How do I direct it? Am I dissipating it? Is energy being lost in physical tension? Am I using my energy nervously? I need to be aware of where my energy is and what it's doing. The energization exercises are just one of Master's really super duper contributions to our well-being. So, on this letter from 1990, on whether certain inverted yoga poses are harmful as claimed by some experts. So Swami says, I'm tempted to lump the objections of those experts, with quotes, with the medical opinion of a century ago that it is harmful to bathe every day. Swami, the word experts is not Swami's favorite word. In any given number of experts, one will always find a wide variety of opinions. Presently, there is so much publicity against sunbathing that one might conclude that it was dangerous even to go out of doors. People carry little facts to absurd lengths. In fact, sunbathing is good if it is done in moderation. Your physician's advice, too, is good. Do the pose comfortably and without strain. Apparently, someone's asking their doctor about yoga. This is Hatha yoga we're talking about. It's an important rule of yoga not to force anything. I've often emphasized the need to stretch only slightly, if at all, beyond the point of comfort. Some people instead adhere to the Rolfing principle, no pain, no gain. This is a highly questionable doctrine, even in massage, and certainly is not the rule in doing the yoga postures. Now, Swamiji's Ananda Yoga, which he began to introduce in the early 60s, when Hatha Yoga was just beginning. What's happened to Hatha Yoga over all these years is that it's really become, many schools of yoga have become completely divorced from the idea that the purpose of yoga postures is to calm and harmonize the energy in the body so that you can sit still to meditate. That the point of it is to sit still to meditate. The point isn't to sweat and build your muscles and become really extreme in what you do, but there's, a huge school of yoga that is all about how intensely you can practice and how vigorously you can practice. Hatha yoga is not my field of specialty, so that's putting it very mildly. I know nothing about Hatha yoga. I did it somewhat. I know a little from my early days, but I'm no expert. But I see this. I see what people want and what they expect. And of course, yogas can do all kinds of things for you. But what Swami taught was how to use yoga in a very harmonious way, which will also greatly improve your physical health. But he's approaching it from a point of view of cooperation and harmony, not mastery. This is the no pain, no gain. Swamiji taught you should stretch very little, if at all, beyond the point of comfort. And the way he taught Hatha yoga is that you relax into it. You don't push into it, but you put yourself in the position. Then Swami also taught affirmations, so that you match your thoughts and your affirmation with the state of consciousness the posture is meant to induce. And the more you get in tune with the state of consciousness the posture is meant to induce, the more your body will naturally fall into the position. And it's an entirely different way. It's very much like we were talking about before. You magnetize the energy from a higher level rather than driving it up from below. Just a wholly different approach. And Ananda Yoga, which is named specifically, is because it's a wholly different approach. It's not what many people want, but for those who want it, it's absolutely ideal. The thing about yoga postures is they induce states of consciousness and they represent states of consciousness. Anandamoyi Ma, who was a great saint in India, she had thousands of followers. She passed away in 1982. She was very saintly from a very young age and never did, energy would flow through her and her body would assume yoga postures. She would not put her body into yoga postures, but her body would assume different postures because her consciousness would enter into that state, and then her body would reflect it. So when you do yoga from that perspective, which is why Swami matched them with the affirmations, you're just doing something very different and beneficial, deeply beneficial, many of the same benefits, but also many others. So, the rule with those particular poses, halasana, etc., the inverted poses, is to balance them by following them with their opposite positions. So that's one of the ways that, the way Swami taught Hatha Yoga is, you bend forward, you bend backwards. You just every part of it so that you're always developing in a harmonious way. Left and right, forward and back, downward, backwards. So, Hatha Yoga has survived for thousands of years, Swami says. It is not a new fad, but a tried and proven system. What you are doing with the inverted poses is perfectly correct. I hope this answers your questions. If you have more, please don't hesitate to write. And here's a fun one, a couple of fun questions. Kriyananda answers questions about yoga's growing popularity among celebrities. This was in the year 2000. Somebody from Los Angeles, I think, wrote, a reporter wrote, and Swami wrote written answers to the questions. So the question is, why do you think yoga is so intriguing to many Hollywood celebrities? That is, why do you think so many of them are getting interested in it? Now, this is the part that was so fun. Swami writes, I think that living in a world of fiction helps to develop in those people who are more aware a sensitivity to alternate realities. Meaning, they're interested in yoga because they're not so narrow in their thinking. If you're in the movie industry and you're a fairy princess this month, and next month you're a superhero, and the time after that, you're an orphan lost somewhere, and now you're a drunken mother. You're just like, you're always going somewhere that isn't where you usually are. So you have this idea in your mind that that anything is possible. I have a few friends who are theatrically inclined, and my brother is one of them, also like this. It's just like we can start on some fantasy theory about something, just some little witticism, and then it just becomes like, you just keep adding to it. If you have that kind of imagination, it's just whatever was static reality, why should we just be with static reality? We just move to the next and move to the next. This is not exactly about this, but I remember one of my really fun childhood memories with my brother, my older brother. My mother brought home the groceries, and I'm not sure whether she asked us to put them away. Perhaps she did. But my brother and I would often do these silent sort of improvs. That's the word I was looking for. I have these friends who are just like into improv, and we just start improvising from wherever we were. So my brother and I would do these improvs, but somehow or another it started, and we were putting the groceries away. That must have been it. And he picked up some small round object, maybe like a lemon or a grape or something like that, and he tossed it to me, and I tossed it back. We played catch for a minute. Then he looked around and he found a slightly larger object. We started with a grape, we went to a lemon, then we went to an orange, then we went to a grapefruit, then we went to a cantaloupe. And then we were actually throwing the watermelon back and forth in the room. But it was just like, you just start and you go into this, like, why not? Just into another world. We're supposed to be putting the groceries away, but why don't we just start this whole other stream of life? And it's a very good quality, which is one of the reasons why reading literature and seeing plays and just expanding your mind from the obvious. So Swami gives the first and obvious answer. These people are used to alternate realities. They're not thinking along conventional lines all the time. So what yoga? Why not? It's because it's from another country, because it's not what I grew up with. Why should that stop me? But then she says, of course, the physical aspects of yoga are attractive to people whose livelihood depends on their looking young and physically fit, which is probably the biggest reason why people follow it, which they can accomplish through Hatha Yoga. But the inward, truer aspects are most attractive to those whose minds are open and are not enclosed in habit-created patterns of thought. Certainly the movie profession invites new ways of looking at things. people whose minds are not enclosed in habit-created patterns of thought. So that's if you're an actress or a producer or anything like that. You're just living in these, you're always creating other worlds. So you're not thinking that things have to be a certain way. I've always loved the expression, which I learned a few years ago. The phrase was trying to find a Martian solution to a problem. First, I didn't understand what that meant. That meant if you walked on this planet and you were from Mars and you didn't know what things were, you wouldn't just look at a baseball and think about baseball. You would just simply see a round object that was a little bit hard. And if you were looking for a round object, you might use it for something entirely different. When I would work for our school, our K through 8 school, where we would have this huge theater production, and I would have done many years, I've done the costumes for that. And we don't have a big budget, and I'm recycling things that we've used in the past. But every so often, I need something, and I'll go to some variety store, the fabric store, the costume, not the party store. Go to the party store for a Martian solution. I'll just need something, and I'll just walk around and just see what looks something like what I need, rather than what it was used for. Famously, one of my sister costumers, she was making costumes for the 3 wise men for Christmas. And I don't even know if these are really common now, but there's a Jell-O mold, which is kind of goes up in a cone and it has multiple layers in it. And so she made this marvelous crown for a king out of this Jell-O mold because it was such an interesting shape. You know, and it would fit around the forehead, and then it went up in tiers. It went up in tiers to sort of a rounded top like this. And of course, you wouldn't normally go to the cookware department and pick up something and put it on your head. But she needed an interesting base that she could decorate for a crown, and it just came out absolutely marvelously. That's a Martian solution. When your mind is not habit-bound, you see things differently. My brother was very creative that way, and so we were putting away the groceries, and instead we're just going to see how big an object we can throw back and forth. I still remember the look on his face when he saw the watermelon. I think we only kind of rolled it from hand to hand. I don't think we had the nerve to try to throw it. We were too small. But all of this was in silence. But I remember as we were getting closer, his eyes getting really big, and the way he picked it up and looked at me like, are we really going to do this? But that's such people, which we should try to be one of them, can always be learning and understanding new things. Somebody comes in and shows you something that's very odd, which yoga could be before everybody knew about it. Seems very odd, but why not? A whole huge part of the world has been following it literally for millennia. Why not? Just because it's not my way, I can live in another world. So the next question is, how is yoga of particular importance for everyone in today's electronic, stressful world? Swami says, you've paired 2 things that needn't of their own nature be paired, meaning electronic and stressful. So here, in fact, there are 2 questions. The first is, how is yoga of particular importance in today's electronic world? And the answer is that yoga makes us more aware of ourselves as bodies of energy, not merely material substance. The more aware one becomes that one is energy, the greater control one has in one's own life. So what he's looking at here, in this electronic age, what we're seeing in all these electronics, what we're seeing is a subtle use of energy. Prior to this age, energy was always mechanical. And now people understand that energy is subtle, it's electronic, it's everywhere. I mean, they say now that an Apple Watch has more computing power than the computer that sent the first spaceship out into space. Just in the watch, like, how do it know? Where does the energy come from? Because we didn't know about it. And an interesting fact, which I don't think happens that much anymore, but the engines in automobiles used to be measured in horsepower. I don't know if they're still measured in horsepower, probably not. power. Because what people understood for locomotion was a horse. So here's an engine in this wheeled vehicle that can go, it has as much power as 5 horses. So if you have a carriage that was pulled by 5 horses, you recognize that this automobile can move as fast or as powerful as your 5 horsepower carriage. I mean, nowadays, who even knows nobody knows how much power a horse has. It just doesn't mean anything to us anymore because we've moved into an age of energy. So what yoga does is yoga puts us in tune with the age we're living in. This is an age of energy. Yoga makes us conscious of our own bodies as energy, and that gives us a greater understanding of the world that's going on around us. But he also says, the more aware one becomes that one is energy, the greater control one has in one's own life. By increasing the flow of energy to the body, one can maintain good health and overcome illness and other physical setbacks in record time. By increasing the flow of energy in one's work, one can be more successful in everything one attempts and can greatly shorten the time for achieving it. With great energy, indeed, one can do in a few minutes what others may require weeks or months to accomplish. Swami showed that many times. He said it's not time, it's intensity of energy. And if you can concentrate, focus your energy, and draw on superconscious intuition, you'll just know what to do. Whereas many times people take a long time to sort of figure everything out, when if they knew that they were energy and could direct that energy, then you could be far more successful much faster. By increasing the flow of energy to other people, one can vastly increase and deepen the love and friendship between oneself and them, and also affect them for the good in their own lives. So he's talking about if you're more aware of energy, then you can be healthier and physically better. If you're more aware of energy, you can concentrate and be more creative in your work. If you increase the flow of energy, you can relate to people with more dynamism and more appropriate energy and can really build wonderful friendships. Isn't it wonderful to be with people who actually give you energy? And I don't just mean in a selfish way, oh, they're giving me energy, but who actually give you energy, who relate, who sit up and listen, who pay attention to what you've said, respond as if they understood, share their own reality with you. And if you can become that kind of person, just being the kind of person that you wish your friends were like. And you can do that if you become aware of yourself as energy and then can direct that energy. If you don't know where your energy is or how to control it or how to direct it, then we're always at sea. This is what he said way back up here. The more aware one becomes that one is energy, the greater control one has in his own life. By increasing the flow of energy in one's life, one finds abundant happiness, insight, and wisdom in guiding one's affairs. What he's saying here, energy is everything. If you really look at your life and you think about what makes you nervous, what you're afraid of, what gives you confidence or gives you lack of confidence, it's always a question of quantity and quality of energy. If you feel that you have enough energy to face it, it's not a problem. And much of the time, when you think it's a problem, it's because you don't have the confidence that you have the energy to meet it. You're either unwilling, you're afraid, you lack confidence. But if you know that I can just do it, you just do it. So the more we practice all the time, understanding where energy comes from, this is Yogananda's energization exercises too, the more aware we are and the more control we have, the more everything simply works. If you have more energy, you'll find greater happiness, insight, and wisdom. And then he answers the other question. As for the question of stress, yoga helps one to become calmer, more centered in oneself in a good way. That is to say, it produces the opposite of being self-centered. It puts one more in control of oneself and one's own life and helps one to resolve problems with much greater ease. So there you have it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Even a little practice of this inward religion will free you from dire fears and colossal sufferings. So Swamiji's claims there are not exaggerated. It's because energy is the key. Quantity and quality of energy, that's the key to success in life. And yoga helps you increase the quantity and refine the quality. Quantity and quality of energy, think about it. I mean, just take that as a template. Every time you run into a difficulty, ask yourself, what's the problem here? Because it's always going to be either the quantity or the quality of energy. So you increase the quantity, you refine the quality, and everything in your life will improve. This inward religion that Krishna is referring to is this inward awareness of myself as a flow of energy. And then here's the last one in this section. A devotee wrote, Master said, now we're hearing the devotee's letter, Master said that the metaphysical cause of illness is the battle between the upward and downward currents in the spine. Since Kriya harmonizes and neutralizes these currents, it should bring about good health. Is this true? Swami says, yes. Lahiri Mahashaya recommended Kriya for everything, and you've said it correctly. So Kriya, the Kriya of Lahiri Mahashaya, it does exactly that, increases the quantity and quality of energy by the understanding of how it flows in the spine, and then everything in future will improve. So my friends, thus ends our section on yoga techniques. Thank you very much for joining.